Thank you for listening and supporting the Daily Memphian. Sign up for one of our many free newsletters and breaking news alerts at dailymemphian.com/email to receive the latest local news stories impacting our community. Our weekly newsletters cover everything from sports to arts and culture, business, food, and more, along with daily updates of all the news we publish each day. Sign up or manage your email preferences at dailymemphian.com/email.
Welcome back to another edition of the Daily Memphian's Memphis Grizzlies podcast. This is your host, Grizzlies beat writer Drew Hill, joined as always by columnist Chris Herrington. Chris, again, as we've done every week, can we just get a quick update on the life of Chris Herrington for those that may be interested?
I don't know how interesting it is. I just hanging out, living my life at my house. I don't think I've been in my car in 3 days. Because my wife walks to work and I work either at home or coffee shops in the neighborhood. And, we got pretty much everything we need within walking distance. So I haven't been out much.
That's nice. How do you like the new home? Are you adjusted?
Yeah. It's the thing where you do like 90% of your move in the first week or two. And then the other 10% takes about 6 months. So we've hit the 90% stage, and now it'll be sort of slow to wrap up all the little stuff.
Well, we are in mock draft season. We have. I think it's fair to say. Correct me if I'm wrong. We've run out of a little bit of gas here and momentum towards the draft. We talked about for weeks how this thing is still more than a month away. This thing is still 5 weeks away. I feel like we've hit the point where we're out of gas. Do you get that sense?
Yeah, I mean, I've been trying to space it all out. I sort of saw that. I wrote a few weeks ago, like, this is not going to happen for 5 or 6 months or 5 or 6 weeks. So I sort of listed out topics I wanted to write about. I've been trying to space them out. And so, not just about the draft, but about the offseason, because the draft and the offseason are sort of collapsed together. And so, I wrote some draft, updated draft stuff last week in terms of my own board. Who cares? And then I did centers this week. And there's some other topics, to get into. But I've been trying to space it out. You can't, rush to, do everything immediately. And then what are you going to do for the next 5 weeks,
Yeah. At this point, we've talked about pretty much every single prospect. But, I mean, there was a little bit of chatter since we last spoke about the Grizzlies moving up potentially in the draft. This is not something that would be stunning, I would say, from a Grizzlies perspective. It's something we've seen Zach do several times over and over and over again. The story, it came from Kevin O'Connor in The Ringer. It basically said moving up for Klingon. Do you think it'd be clear that if they were to move up, it would be for Klingon?
I don't know that anything's clear. I mean, I think many people have drawn the line between the Grizzlies not having a true center on their roster and Klingon being the top-rated, unless you want to count Sarr, Klingon being the top-rated true center on the board. So it makes sense to a lot of people. I assume that reporting is not just based on, hey, this makes sense. It's based on some level of intel. That intel may or may not be direct, though. Sometimes things get passed around and you're not sure how accurate it is, but I don't think it's made up. It's something that has been heard by somebody from somewhere. And so my strong suspicion is the Grizzlies have been lightly canvassing to look at all kinds of paths. But the reality is nobody gets serious about this stuff until the week of the draft. So I am certain they've had conversations about moving up in the draft. I'm certain they've had conversations about moving back in the draft. I'm certain they've had conversations about moving out of the draft. This is not reporting, but I just assume they probably had some conversation with Cleveland about Jared Allen. But none of this stuff is going to get serious till it gets sort of close to the draft. So it's all sort of mostly a feeling out process at this point.
Okay. I'm going to do I'm going to go somewhere really weird with this. I literally just received an email like 2 minutes ago.
Okay.
And as you were responding to that, I was interested in reading this. Now listen, this is one of like those promo emails that you get. I get a lot often from like betting sites that come up with like made up betting lines or like whatever it may be. Not that that's interesting, but this so this is from Betway. Okay, Betway used they analyzed the best NBA draft teams. Now, I don't know if this makes a ton of sense, but it's a good talking point for us to discuss here. They determined the best draft teams of the last 10 years. The way that they determined this was basically by grading out teams based on the following: players that have been drafted to make an all-rookie team, players that have been drafted to make an all-NBA team, all-stars to be drafted, and end-of-season award winners / regular season stat leaders that have been drafted, and NBA champions. Do you have a guess at who the number one draft team is?
I mean, what's the time frame on this?
The last 10 years.
I don't off the top of my head. I assume the Grizzlies rank high, I would think, in this.
The Grizzlies are number 3.
Yep.
The only teams ahead of the Grizzlies are the Los Angeles Lakers. I don't know how that makes any sense to me, but I suppose that it could. And the Philadelphia 76ers are number 1. I'm trying to think of the draft picks that those two teams have hit on.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look and see the methodology on that. I mean, those are not teams that have had a lot of high level draft picks in the past 10 years that I can think of. And when Philadelphia did, it was Markelle Fultz, but that did not work out, you know. I would question, again, I don't know where this is coming from, and so I don't know what the methodology is.
Joel Embiid apparently being drafted in 2014, 10 years ago exactly, because he's made so many teams. I suppose that would be why they are so high. Anyway, just an interesting note. They have the Grizzlies as the number 3 draft team of the last 10 years. Back to what we were discussing before, I think you're right. I don't think you can assume that there's any singular player in which they would be moving up to go get or to trade for or anything of that matter. I do get the feeling we may see some creativity from Zach Kleiman on draft night, as we almost always do, just because I think he's got a history of that. And maybe if there is a move, it's one that we're not thinking about or we don't see right now. I mean, we certainly didn't see Marcus Smart. And so we'll see what happens as we sort of approach that day. It's interesting. Do you like the fact that they've gone to the 2-day draft? I'm not sure anyone's going to watch the second day.
Well, I don't like the way they've organized it. I like the idea of the 2 days, but to me, it shouldn't be a first round, second round. It should be either a lottery in the rest or top 20 in the rest. You shouldn't give even weight to the 2 rounds because that's not the reality of the importance of the rounds or the interest in the rounds. And so I think that is the problem with this. Doing the 2 days makes sense to me in the sense that the teams want more time to actually conduct their business, but the NBA wants the whole thing to be a televised event. And so that's sort of the only way you can do that. The only reason that second round picks have only been 2 minutes is to squeeze it into a television slot. Because otherwise it makes no sense to only give teams 2 minutes to conduct their business in those rounds. So I think the teams want more time to conduct their business, and the NBA wants it on television. And so that's sort of the way that happens.
Speaking of the second round picks, we haven't listed out like players that we like at that stage. We may do that before the draft gets here. But what do you suspect the Grizzlies? I guess could you lay out the options for the Grizzlies in terms of consolidating that? Because it's hard to imagine that they would use 2 seconds. I mean, I suppose that they could.
It's not hard. I don't think it's hard to imagine all that they use 2 seconds because the second's not going to be on the roster. It's going to be on a 2-way contract. And so, if they use all 3, the person they pick at 9 is going to be projected as a rotation player more than likely. The person they take at 39 is going to be someone that they're trying to put a contributor on the back end of the roster on a rookie minimum contract to help ease their tax burden. And then the player they take in the 50s is going to be on a two-way. So I don't think it's hard at all to imagine them using all 3 picks on players on the 18-man roster, actually.
Okay, all right. So they have the space for those. I for some reason in my head, I was mistaking. I've been mistaking that. They've got the roster spots for all of those players.
Well, they can or they will. And you
Right.
know, this team has brought more players into camp on contracts than they have roster spots like 3 or 4 years in a row. But I think in terms of, the player, if they take someone in the late 50s, that player is not going to be on the 15-man roster. It'll either be a stash like last year or it'll be a two-way. And so it's really, you're talking about, 2 players on your real roster. And I think the attraction of the pick at 39, maybe they trade up with it or maybe they trade out with it. But I think the attraction of that for them is going to be to try to find a contributor who will be on a rookie minimum salary, not a veteran's minimum, but a rookie minimum, a bare bones lowest salary you can make to put on a roster because of the level of tax they're in. If they can find someone, Xavier Tillman type who can actually contribute when needed, that's making the absolute minimum salary in the league, I think that's what they're going to want to do. So I think if they keep the pick at 39, I don't think they're taking a project. I think they're taking, Baylor Shireman or KJ Simpson or like some experienced player like that would be my guess.
Is it in terms of what they could use late round picks on? Is there a particular skill set that stands out to you that you think would be an important add?
Well, I think versatility and shooting at that point. You're talking about filling in the back of the roster. You can just do just about anything to be your 14th, 15th man.
Right.
But what I would look at this point is because Zach Kleiman has a history of moving around in the draft, moving down from 9, up from 39, sort of moving to target a specific player. Because let's say they would want the Klingon, they can't move up for Klingon. Who do they really want? To me, the question for them starts with who do we want? And maybe the answer to that is Zach Edey. Maybe it's Khalil Ware. Maybe, and if they can move back and get the player they want, I think that's something that they would try to do. They do not have a history of just the draft comes to us and we just pick whoever's there. They decide who they want and they go try to find that player. That's what they've always done.
I don't believe they've traded back before. Would that be correct?
I don't think so, but they haven't had a lot of picks this high.
Right.
This is only going to be the 3rd top 10 pick they've had going into a draft. Only the 2nd, really, because Kleiman was not in GM when they took Jaren Jackson. So this will only be the 2nd top 10 pick they've had going into the draft week. Since Zach Kleiman has been the GM, and the other one was the 2nd overall pick for John Morant. You weren't moving away from that. And so when you're 9th, there's more room to move down than move up.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised even if they traded up a second time, as they've done often, consolidate those second rounders or use down the line assets to get back in the first round again. Because
you could see them pairing the pick at 39 with some protected future first to move up, and maybe you move up to draft an Edey or a Ware or a Filipowski. Maybe if you don't get your center at 9, maybe that's what you do. You're like, here's a top 10 protected 2025 first and pick number 39 to go to pick, I'm making up numbers, 17, 19, 22, something like that, and get a center. I could see that happen.
The old Jake LaRavia type of, not exactly, but Jake LaRavia, David Roddy type of move. So we'll see. Teams spend those second round picks like they're nothing. They just get exchanged at such a high rate. It feels like that. I guess we'll see what happens, but that'll be interesting for the Grizzlies. By the way, I got in a little trouble for asking you about Gigi Jackson. Did you see that?
Oh, on Twitter? Whatever. People get mad about stuff on Twitter. I don't. It is what it is. The Gigi Jackson stuff is weird because, In that conversation, like I said, I think he has the upside to be a quality starter, maybe an all-star, and given his good contract, I would be reluctant to trade him. I didn't consider that like a damning comment on Gigi Jackson. I feel like I'm pretty positive on Gigi Jackson, but I guess there are different standards to that.
I mean, I wrote that he's a breath of fresh air in a lost season, and that I wrote about him playing the drums and all the people coming to see him from church. But I mean, if you don't say he's LeBron James, you can get in trouble out there. So I do love Gigi, and I think he's going to be awesome. I'm super excited to watch him play in Summer League. Is there anyone else on the roster that should clearly play in Summer League in your mind? Let's go down the list here and try to figure. I mean, or do they just fill it out with, random folks? I mean, do you want to see Jake? Would you want to see Jake in Summer League, or did he show you enough?
I wouldn't mind. I mean, to me, it's not about showing me stuff. It's about sort of what's good for him. And I think building on his finish in Summer League probably would be a totally reasonable thing for him to do. It's rare you see the guy going into year 3 play Summer League, but he's in this kind of situation where when you do see it, it's something like that. It's a guy who hadn't quite gotten grounded in the NBA, but has a little momentum and wants to build on it. I think he is the kind of rising third-year player who would play Summer League. Whether he will or not, I don't know, but I think that would make some sense to see him in Summer League. I don't really need to see Vince Williams in Summer League. Scottie Pippen Jr. is the other one. That's an obvious. And Trey Jemison, if he is still on the roster at that point.
I believe he's still in Memphis. I believe Trey Jemison's out there in Memphis. I saw him around town. So
I think Jemison is more of a, in terms of, their two ways they're carrying over, I think Jemison's more of a bubble guy. I think whether he's back on the two way is going to depend on a few different things. One of those is how the draft shakes out. The other is maybe his Summer League play. Whereas I think Pippen is just going to be back.
Yeah, I would agree. I think Pippen should play in Summer League. He would be one of the players I think that would draw more interest in Summer League. But obviously, if the pick doesn't get traded and it gets spent, that's going to be obviously a big name to watch in Las Vegas. And then we're going to have the same thing all over again with Gigi Jackson, except this time around with more hype, obviously because of his awesome rookie season that he did have. NBA Finals going on right now. Boston's up 2-0. I don't know if this is going to get to 6 games, Chris, as we predicted. It may not, based on years.
I was not very forceful in any prediction I made. I don't think it's going to get to 6 games. It feels like it could be a Boston in 5 kind of situation. Maybe Dallas, the gentleman's sweep, they call it. Maybe Dallas gets one at home. That game too was, kind of close there in the fourth quarter. So it wouldn't surprise me if Boston let up a little bit and let Dallas get a win in this. But I think the Boston defense is such, and the Mavs got really 2 players they can run through. I think they're a player short in terms of being able to create offense against this defense.
I thought that Minnesota was going to have a lot of different people that they could throw at the Mavs stars. And that was going to be the difference in that series. And then here you are again. You've got you could feel the same way, and it doesn't really matter because Luka is still putting up absurd numbers, 30-point triple-double in the finals. Kyrie has been impacted, feels like. He's struggling to produce at the same level he did in the Western Conference Finals. But Boston's just different. There's just something different about Boston. It's like every player that they put on the floor is such a quality player. And even if they're not the top of the league, that quality is just going to overpower whoever they're playing against. And it's a testament to the way they built the team.
Well, I know Minnesota was ranked first defensively in the regular season. I think Boston was second or third. I think they were second. But there's a difference there. That Minnesota team, you got Mike Conley, who's historically a good defender, but he's also 37, 38 years old, and he's a small guard. and you got Towns, who's big but has never been a good defender. And they were able to put up a great statistical defense, even with a couple of players who are, if not weak links, then like not super strong links. Boston, there's nowhere to hide on Boston. There's nothing to do with Boston. They're 5 for 5 on all NBA level defenders with their main lineups.
Yeah. And I mean, when you look at Dallas, it's interesting because they got through that Thunder series and the Minnesota series, and it felt like their role players were giving them plenty. Gafford was pretty good, I thought, in the Minnesota series. PJ Washington was awesome in the Oklahoma City series for Dallas. And now, outside of Luka, they're just getting nothing. They're just not getting anything else. And I don't think that they're going to be capable of winning a single game in this series if those other guys don't show up at some point. But you're right. Boston just has no weaknesses. They can just run out their 5, and that 5 is going to be good enough to defend Dallas, no matter who they put on the floor. So it's been impressive what Boston has done so far. Is Boston – I heard Jeff talking about this on the radio. Which team is more relatable to the Grizzlies, just in general? Is it Dallas or Boston?
I think it's – I mean, you could turn that different ways. I think it's Boston in the sense that – to me, there's a clear line between Luka Doncic and Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown. Whoever you want to say this is the best Boston player. There's a line. There's a line in the NBA between the true superstars, the MVP level players, and just the all-star really good players. And Luka is above that line, and everyone with Boston is below that line. And with the Grizzlies, I mean, Ja Morant can be a superstar in a kind of celebrity sense. But in a basketball sense, he's below the line. He's on the Tatum Brown side of the line, not the Luka side of the line. And to me, one of the questions has been, can a team win a title without a player above that line? And it has not happened since the Detroit Pistons of Chauncey Billups, Rip Hamilton, Rasheed Wallace, Ben Wallace, Tayshaun Prince. That's more than 20 years ago. That is the last team to win a title without a player on above the line. And if Boston wins it, they're going to be I know they seem like more of a star-laden team than that Pistons team was, and they were a little bit. But Tatum is not Nikola Jokic, Giannis Antetokounmpo, LeBron James, Steph Curry. He's just not. He's below the line. And so for the Grizzlies, you want some evidence that you can win a title without a player above that line. And Boston is about to do it.
Which team, from a schematic standpoint, is closer to Memphis? I do think Dallas is a little bit smaller.
Right.
So maybe they're a little bit more relatable in that way. But I hear you out. I hear that. I mean, that's obviously a good point. But, I go back and forth. I think it's difficult.
Yeah, it depends a little bit on how. All teams are sort of different unto themselves, right?
Right.
On one hand, you could say, well, I mean, Ja may not be Luka, but Ja sort of has the role of Luka, right? Like in terms of dominating the offense, and then with a sidekick, Irving to Bane or whatever. There's no Jaren on that team, though. And one of the problems I think Dallas has had at this point is they don't have a third option who can create offense. And after game 2, in the postgame, Josh Hart, who plays for the Knicks, was on the postgame show, and they asked him, so what's your adjustment? What do you do with your Dallas? And he said, and I'm not trying to clown on Josh Hart because there's no good answer, but it was kind of funny. He said, well, they need to start running some offense through Derrick Jones and PJ Washington, just to ease the burden on Luka and Kyrie. And that just tells you there's no good answer, because you're not winning the title running offense through PJ Washington and Derrick Jones. What the Grizzlies do have that Dallas doesn't is a third option to run offense through. Whether you consider that Jaren or Bane as the third option, they do have a third player who can create offense on their own. And that is something that I think Dallas is sorely missing in this series.
The Grizzlies, I think you're right. They have 3 main ones, but they honestly have used so many different guys as a result of all their injuries. It's interesting who you may have confidence in. Like, I think Memphis would be okay if Vince ended up having to play some point guard next year based on who's in and out of the lineup. I would feel pretty confident based on what we saw from him. Now we wouldn't be the best. He's not a star option like those other guys are, but they've got options I'm more confident in maybe than Dallas.
Sure, but there's a difference between the flow of a season and like the NBA Finals against the Boston Celtics defense, right?
Yeah,
like I also want to see Vince Williams handling the ball and exploring that part of his game through 82. But if you get into an NBA Finals game against Boston, my path to victory, I don't think it's running my offense through Vince Williams.
No, Gigi though.
Someday you hope, and someday it can come as fast as it'll come.
Yeah, I mean, if he may. It's interesting. Like we can go down this path again. It's fine. The thing I want to know the most, honestly, and I don't think we have a true answer to, is just how involved he's going to be with the scoring load when he's on the floor. Because is he going to take 14 shots or is he going to take 8? And I think you want to get him shots because he's obviously a good player, but the opportunity you feel like won't be the same because there's going to be other stars out there. But how much is the ball going to find Gigi? That's my question.
Oh, I think it's going to vary game to game and lineup to lineup. It depends on sort of who's on the floor with. I think he's the fourth most talented offensive player on the team, and maybe someday he'll be more than the fourth most talented offensive player on the team. But I think in terms of raw talent, I mean, Luke Kennard's a more talented shooter. But in terms of an all-around offensive talent, I mean, Gigi Jackson has a talent level that would make him the fourth guy on the team. And the fourth guy on the team could be, a 14, 15-point-a-game guy. But I just don't know. I feel my suspicion is it's going to be up and down. He's just too young, and the opportunities are going to be too contingent because he's going to be at best fourth in the pecking order going into the season. That I just don't think it's going to be consistent with him. I just don't think it can be.
The hype is about to get even bigger if he goes and drops 35 in every summer league game in Salt Lake City and Las Vegas. It's going to be a Gigi Jackson summer. I don't have anything else to add, Chris. We don't have a lot going on. Anything we have missed that we should have touched on?
Well, I've got a piece up today as we record this week as people listen on the Great Center Search. I did a column back in March on that, on sort of covering the whole expanse of potential centers the Grizzlies could try to target. And I revisit that this week, get a little bit and sort of the idea of the team and the kind of centers they may consider or not. And then I got a list. I ranked them 20 centers. They could target. Not all of these players are necessarily available, but they're all players who could be. And so I did the thought exercise of, can I imagine a scenario in which the pieces align where this could happen? And I included players where I could imagine the scenario. So there's no Nikola Jokic on the list. That scenario I cannot imagine.
I have not had the chance to read that yet. We're recording this especially early in the morning. So I feel like my brain is halfway functioning. I've got another project I've been working on. Did you list them in? Did you rank them in like numbers, or did you?
Yeah, they're ranked roughly, and they're not ranked by I think these are the 20 best players, or I think these are the 20 players most likely. It's sort of a mix of the two. The best targets when you consider how much the player I think would impact the Grizzlies, how obtainable they might be, what you have to give up to get the player, which comes into play. And so it's sort of a thought exercise. We'll see. The challenge to Zach Kleiman is to obtain a center that's not even mentioned in the article. Because last year we all knew we all know they're going to obtain a center. Well, last year we all knew they're going to have to obtain a Dylan Brooks replacement. Everyone knew this. And I did a similar kind of thing where I probably talked about 30 different players they could potentially go get. Then they went and traded for a point guard and Marcus Smart to fill the Dylan Brooks role, and no one saw that coming. So I'm laying down the gauntlet, the challenge to Zach Kleiman once again. I dare you, find a player to fill this role that I did not mention in this article.
The Zach Kleiman sneak past Chris Herrington challenge. That's what this is right here. Okay, well, give us. We got a few minutes left. Give us a taste of the top 5 or 10.
So I mean, two of the players. I'm trying to remember who I had fifth. I remember the top 4. The 2 of the players in the top 4 are the players we've probably talked about the most, and that's Donovan Clingan and Jared Allen. Donovan Clingan is the top incoming rookie option. Jared Allen is the best center who has been rumored in some significant way to be available on the trade market. So those are definitely two of the 4. Another guy I threw out there is a guy I'd mentioned before. I probably at this point, because this is none of these things individually are likely to happen. And there's no specific intel he's available, but I think Wendell Carter Jr. out there again. It makes sense for the Grizzlies. There are scenarios in which that would make sense for the Magic, depending on how things shake out. And then the other one, which and his Memphis connection has zero to do with me putting him on the list, although it may make him more interesting to some listers. Jalen Duren's a guy I would take a look at. I would take a look at the Detroit Pistons. Here's the thing about the Pistons. They had the 5th pick in the draft. They have a rebuild that's been sputtering that seems like it's not working. And they have a brand new front office leadership. Detroit Pistons are now the basketball operations of the Detroit Pistons are now being run by a guy who did not draft Jalen Duren, did not draft Cade Cunningham, didn't draft any of these dudes. And they have the 5th pick in this draft. What happens if Donovan Clingan is there at 5? Which he may be. He may go at 3, but what if he's there at 5? It's not crazy to think he'd be there at 5. If he's there at 5, what are the Pistons doing? Is that a prime trade-up spot if you want to trade up and draft Donovan Clingan? Yeah. What if the Pistons look at it and say, you know what? We think Clingan's the best player on the board, and we kind of like him better than the guy we got. Suddenly, that puts a guy like Jalen Duren in play in the trade market. So the fact that there's a possibility a center will be the best player available at their draft pick, and the fact that they have new front office leadership that's going to reevaluate the whole thing. I'm not saying Jalen Duren is available, but there are ways to see that could happen.
Duren's fit would be more. No, I'm not saying he wouldn't play center, but like another forward similar to Jaren.
So you could put whatever label you want on him.
Yeah.
Like they play together. I mean, Duren's another one of these guys who's not going to stretch the floor. He's not really a shooter. But he was one of the top defensive rebounders in the NBA last season, which is a fit for the Grizzlies. He's a guy who can absolutely roll to the rim and catch lobs by Ja Morant. He's a target above the rim. And he had kind of sneaky good passing numbers. The read on him is that he's been a disappointment defensively relative to his talents. What I would say about that, he's like 22 years old, 21 years old, and his team's a mess. And so I actually think it would be a really great situation for him to play with Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. And I could see a path where Detroit with new front office leadership wants to shake things up. I'm not saying they will, but I'm not the only person who speculated about Duren potentially being available for those reasons. One thing I noticed, and we can get in this maybe more next week or as we go forward, when I did this list, there's a real debate, among sort of the more hardcore fan base about do you want a center who can't stretch the floor, who can't play on the perimeter? Is that dooming you to are you putting a hard ceiling on yourself if you're committing to a center who can't do that? I think that's a worthwhile debate. But one thing I noticed making the list is those guys are hard to come by. There's a lot more names you can come up with who may be available who are not that than who are that. And so if the Grizzlies are insistent upon our center has to stretch the floor, the options are going to narrow quickly.
Yes, I would agree. I mean, there's just not a lot of stretch players in the league, period.
Right.
So that'll be fascinating to see. I think we may have overdone it just a little bit on like the idea that they would want to play like a 5-out offense, because a 5-out offense, like we say 5 out, but doesn't always necessarily have all 5 players be on the perimeter. Somebody could be standing, away from the block, but still within the 3-point line. That is also explained. So in the LaRoche pieces and stuff. So it's not to say that even if they wanted to use those concepts that they wouldn't at all draft a player like that, but they would need to draft somebody who moves well. I think Duran moves well. You know,
You're talking about like basically 4 out and a guy in the dunker spot. And if you watch Boston play, a lot of times Drew Holiday's the guy in the dunker spot when they play, especially when they starting with Horford out there, they'll have that situation going. But Drew Holiday can bounce out and shoot threes too. I have mixed feelings about the whole thing. I as a basketball fan, I like variety. I don't necessarily want every player to be a 3-point shooter and every team to take 43s. That's not really the way I want basketball to be. But it's also true that the Boston Celtics and the Dallas Mavericks, I believe, were 1-2 in the NBA in 3-point attempts per game this season.
Out of curiosity, where did Edey come in on your list? Do you remember?
Somewhere in the middle. He was the second incoming rookie I had. So I don't know, 8, 9, something like that. I definitely leaned, other than Klingon, I leaned towards guys who have a little bit more NBA experience. But Edey was certainly on the list.
Well, I can't wait for Zach Kleiman to take some Division II college basketball center to fill the role and sneak past Chris Herrington again.
He's going to sign some 6'5" combo forward and say, this is our center, is what he's going to do. That'd be the move.
Did bringing back Kenneth Lofton get on your list? Because he might, you never know. He could bring back Kenneth, sneak right past you. All right, well, that's going to do it for us this week. We'll be back next week, and we'll be talking more Grizzlies draft. I mean, it does feel like we're getting a little bit closer now. We're what, 20 days away? A little more than 20 days away?
Less than that.
Oh, yeah. My brain is halfway working. We're not 20 days away. We're about 18 days away.
Yep, something like that.
So we'll be back. We'll be talking more Grizzlies draft. And thank you for listening. As always, go check out all of our stuff over at the Daily Memphian. But for Drew and for Chris, we're out of here.
In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.